You know, at BlizzCon 2023, you could have heard a freaking pin drop in the room when Cataclysm Classic was announced.
Our journey will continue into Cataclysm Classic in 2024. The Classic journey started with you as a love letter to the WoW community. We asked what you wanted, you responded to us, and we listened.
Now, I wasn't at BlizzCon personally. I was at an event over that weekend, so I don't know what it was like in the room, but just judging from the recording, a lot of people really were not that excited, which is something, to be fair, that we all could have predicted. Cataclysm Classic, yes, there is people out there that want to play it. Of course there's people that want to play it, but the overwhelming majority of players have no interest in this version of World of Warcraft whatsoever. There's some hype, but compared to TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, and even Season of Discovery, Cataclysm Classic just doesn't really resonate with people. And I know that for a lot of you guys, you're probably sitting there wondering why, because a lot of people watching this video right now, you probably never played Cataclysm back in the day. You probably don't know why so many people for the longest time thought that Cataclysm was WoW's worst expansion. Now, in regards to content and everything that, you know, Cataclysm offered to us as an expansion, it seems cool. I mean, you got a big dragon blowing up the planet and stuff. It's got a good premise. It's got some cool content coming out, Worgen, goblins, these new areas, raids, and so on. But what was the reason people had for not liking Cataclysm back in the day? And what is the reason why today? Why are so many people not interested in Cataclysm Classic? And that's what I'm hoping to answer today. Before we jump in though, of course, have to thank this channel's sponsor, Zygor. It's World of Warcraft's ultimate add-on for leveling, gold making, achievement farming, pet collecting, mount collecting, you name it, it does everything. Check them out down in the description below. So I've got 7 reasons why, 7 things that I have, you know, collected from my own thoughts and from my own memories of the expansion, because I did play it back in the day. 7 things that I would say are the reasons why people are not really into Cataclysm Classic and why they're not that hyped for it. The first point, and this is probably one of the weaker points, which is why I'm saying it first, but for some people out there, it might actually be one of the major reasons why they didn't like Cataclysm, but it's the fact that the expansion destroyed the world that we had fallen so much in love with. The premise of Cataclysm is Deathwing has popped out of Deepholm. He's causing chaos, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and so on. And so Blizzard got it in their mind of taking Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms and completely revamping these old zones. And so Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms would be brought up to sort of a modern standard of questing and content and so on and so forth. Zones were going to be reworked, quest lines were going to change, memorable characters were going to be forgotten, new characters were going to be added. You know, Kalimdor and Eastern Kingdoms, like the OG, like 2 continents from Classic WoW, are kind of like sacred to the World of Warcraft player. And although it was exciting at first, this idea of Deathwing sundering the world and, you know, creating all this change across the 2 continents, everyone was excited for that back in the day, myself included. I mean, come on. But once it was, you know, like once this idea was experienced for the first time, the second time, the third time, you know, leveling up ults and stuff, it quickly felt like a downgrade. And we're gonna come back to this, but it felt like the world that we knew and that we loved had just been broken. And not broken from like a lore perspective, like broken by Deathwing, like it was broken in that what was special about it, the memorable characters and the quest lines and the things that made us fall in love with Azeroth, that had been destroyed. And it had been replaced with very linear quests, very simple characters, and a leveling system that really was just designed to get you to level cap as quickly as possible. This was the time when Blizzard was sort of changing things up. They were removing group quests from the level up content. They were removing the necessity of needing to use maybe professions to help you. Well, not a necessity, it's not like you need professions in Classic WoW, but having, you know, alchemy and having those those extra potions to help you when you're questing in the Barrens, or you're doing that Agaman Mills family crypt quest line in Tirisfal Glades, you know, whatever. You can probably conjure up some examples in your head. You know, it was relevant, it was useful, it was handy to have those things. In Cataclysm, not so much. Everything was just kind of nerfed into the ground. Like I said, I'm going to come back to this point several times, but Cataclysm really broke the world. It broke what was special about it. Let's move on to the second thing, though. The second thing is that the endgame zones in Cataclysm, from Vashj'ir to Mount Hyjal to the Twilight Highlands, they were all disconnected. And this is something that Blizzard learned from. Like, this was an experiment. They had never done this before. You know, in past expansions, TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, whenever a new expansion came out, there was a new continent that we got to explore and all the zones were connected and so on and so forth. Blizzard decided to do something different with Cataclysm, where they were going to have all the endgame zones separated and be in different corners of the world. And this was an interesting experiment, but Blizzard has never done anything like this since, because a lot of people did not like this. They didn't like how, oh man, you know, if I want to go from Twilight Highlands to Mount Hyjal, I gotta go through these portals, I gotta do this, I gotta waste my Hearthstone and go back to Stormwind, Orgrimmar, whatever. It was annoying, it was frustrating. There was a lot of travel time between the different zones. Everything just felt disconnected. It was just not it was an okay idea. Now, there's nothing objectively wrong with adding more zones into the game. I think it would be cool for Classic Plus down the road, for example, for Blizzard to add new zones into Classic Plus, or finish zones that were just completely, well, not completed, like a Jara or Silithus, for example. But don't make these the endgame zones. These should have been questing zones, and the endgame stuff should have been condensed into an area, a continent, an island, and so on and so forth. This is a lesson that Blizzard learned from experience and from Cataclysm, and it was a reason why a lot of people did not like the layout, or the zone layout of the endgame at endgame, if that makes sense. The third thing, and I'll keep this very brief, but in regards to Cataclysm, the lore was kind of confusing. Let me ask a question right now. Very simple question. What was Deathwing's plan in Cataclysm? Like, not what was his plan, you know, to bring about the Hour of Twilight. Like, everybody knows that. But what was he doing to bring about the Hour of Twilight? What was he doing personally? The only thing that Deathwing does, lore-wise, if you really think about it, is he pops out of Deepholm and he sunders the world, then he flies around and lights zones on fire, and then he summons Ragnaros in the whole Mount Hyjal area for the Firelands raid, if I remember correctly. And aside from that, that's pretty much it. He's just kind of flying around, just lighting zones on fire, just waiting for his raid to come out, where, you know, he flies up to Wyrmrest Accord, and then you got Thrall, and he blasts him with a giant golden dinner plate, and then we jump on his back and we kick his ass. Maybe I'm just forgetting, you know, because it's been obviously a very long time, but looking back at Cataclysm, it just kind of seemed like the villains were there. And it was just, we were kind of just hopping from raid to raid, but the villains didn't really seem to have like a plan, or like a well laid out, we're gonna do this, 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 and this to bring about this conclusion. It was just more like, here are the villains, they're trying to bring about the Hour of Twilight, whatever that means, and however that's done, and we gotta stop them. But this was something in Wrath of the Lich King as well. Like, the lore was a bit confusing in Wrath too, but that's a video for another time. I remember talking to my friends about this even back in the day. Like, what is Deathwing doing? Like, lore wise, you know, this is when I was really into World of Warcraft lore personally, reading the books and reading the Shattering and stuff, or I think maybe it was called the Sundering. I don't remember. It was the Warcraft book that came out at the time. And I was just a bit confused, but maybe that's just a personal point from me and my friends at the time. The fourth reason why a lot of people did not like Cataclysm is because of how early game focused it was. Now, for someone like me, like, I'm an altaholic. I love leveling in World of Warcraft. It's my favorite part of the game. I know I'm in a minority when I say that. I know that most people are really more focused on the end game and stuff. But Cataclysm was mostly focused on the early game, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but here we go. the problem was that the early game experience that we got to have in Cataclysm was of a lower quality experience than what we had before. Now, some people would argue the contrary. They would say, oh no, the storytelling was better and the quests were like, you know, better laid out and stuff. And you're right, but that's what made it boring. Once you've gone through Silver Pine Forest once or twice or 3 times, you know the story. You've seen Garrosh call Sylvanas a bitch. You have, you know, gone into Gilneas with the Forsaken and fought with them. You've seen, who was it, Godfrey, when he shoots Sylvanas in the back of the head? You've seen this linear story play out over and over and over. Whereas in classic WoW, you know, what came before, and this is, I mean, I can make a whole video on this subject alone, but you really had the idea of the story was not linear. It just kind of took you wherever you wanted to go. You made your own path. You made your own adventure. You weren't being led from quest to quest to quest. And so the thing is that Cataclysm put all this focus on the early game, and yet the early game felt like a downgrade from what we had before. And this is not some personal opinion that I have. I mean, it is a personal opinion, to be fair, but this was a genuine criticism that a lot of people had of Cataclysm back in the day. There was even the fact that the level up experience felt less satisfying because the world had been nerfed. It had been made a lot easier. I mentioned earlier in the video that Blizzard had removed almost all of the group content from the game. There was still some here and there. You can find some in Cataclysm, like the Durnhold quest line where you do the Durnhold quest, but to be fair, you can solo all of that as a hunter. I remember doing that back in the day. Like, there's still group content, but it's very few. It's very far between. The world is not challenging anymore. You're just kind of running through it. Even when it comes to talent points in Cataclysm, they removed most of the talent point, like, I don't know the word for it, like potentiality in the game. In World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, you've got, what, 70 talent points that you can play with? I don't even remember off the top of my head. But the point is, in Cataclysm, you have, whereas you would think that you would get 75 talent points, the level cap going from 80 to 85, no, Blizzard actually nerfed the whole talent system, and in Cataclysm, you're only going to have 41 talent points. You're only going to be getting a talent point every other level. So the leveling was faster, it was more linear, it was more boring, it was less rewarding, it was less engaging. And so, like, even though there was all this emphasis put on like the early game to make it as great as possible for a new player coming into the game, it actually had the opposite effect. Like, the opposite effect occurred with Cataclysm, and people found the new early game, well, kind of boring. Very boring, in fact. Maybe the first time you go through it, it's fun, but after that first time, I'm telling you, it's dull. But, you know, some people feel that way about classic WoW too, so to each their own. The 5th point was the introduction of a lot of group finder content. This was something that really hurt the social element of the game during Cataclysm's lifespan, and it was something of great controversy that still kind of exists to this day. You can find threads where people still talk about this on the forums and on YouTube videos and stuff. The introduction, or rather the making the game revolve very heavily around looking for group and later on looking for raid. And so people have a sour taste in their mouth when it comes to Cataclysm because of those two things. It was sort of like Cataclysm began sort of the death of the MMO, like the whole massively multiplayer element, and it started to introduce this idea of being a single player World of Warcraft player, where you didn't need to get into a guild, where you didn't need to interact with people, you didn't need to go out and make friends in order to conquer the world, and people really did not like that. The 6th point, going back to the whole LFR thing, we have patch 10.2, the Dragon Soul raid. Now, for those that don't know, the Dragon Soul raid, that patch 4.2, was the longest lasting patch in World of Warcraft history. Patch 4.2 lasted, get this, I didn't even remember it was this long. It lasted from November of 2011 until Mists of Pandaria was released in September of 2012. I remember doing the whole Hour of Twilight raid. I remember doing it on LFR, doing it on normal. This was the time when, for me personally, I really got deeper and deeper into role playing because there was nothing to do in World of Warcraft for months. The game was completely stagnant. It was completely dead. Nothing was happening. The raid had been raided. PvPers were bored. Nothing was going on, and people were pissed off about this. Cataclysm, you probably are starting to understand as this video is progressing that like there was a lot of reasons why people had a sour taste in their mouth in regards to Cataclysm because of so many lackluster things going on with this expansion. It's kind of like the LFG, or rather the LFD, the LFR crap. It just has Cataclysm, you just associate the word with this very sour time in World of Warcraft history, a time of controversy, a time of boredom, but really everything has just been leading to this. The seventh point is very simple, and it's just simply the fact that Cataclysm is not really considered WoW classic. It's not considered classic World of Warcraft, the OG golden era of the game. Cataclysm is when the game went on full decline, which is when people in droves began to leave World of Warcraft. And the reason why, the big fundamental reason as to why people do not consider Cataclysm to be classic World of Warcraft, golden era WoW and such, it's really subjective. But I think it boils down to this, based on comments that I've seen here on Nixium or on forums and stuff, or even in game. I think it really just boils down to this simple fact. Cataclysm is a completely different game to the game that came before it. In the events of Wrath of the Lich King, if I remember correctly, Blizzard was purchased by Activision, and during, Cataclysm's development, Blizzard got a completely different design philosophy for Cataclysm compared to what they had for Vanilla WoW, TBC, and Wrath of the Lich King. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Like I was talking about it at the beginning of the video, but when you start playing through the world, you're going to see how Blizzard has nerfed the social element of World of Warcraft in Cataclysm. You're going to see how there's less group content. There's less of a need for trading with your fellow players. There's less of a community element. You're going to see how the world feels more linear. It's more boring and dull. You're going to see how everything just seems to be designed to just get you on a linear path that takes you to endgame as fast as possible. That way you can start consuming the new raids and whatever the endgame content is. You got to play it to really understand it. For those of you guys like me who played back in the day, you probably know what I'm talking about. But when Cataclysm came out, it felt like a completely different game from the game that we had played, previously in Wrath of the Lich King TBC, and especially Vanilla. Cataclysm was a full departure from like the vanilla design philosophy. If you go and watch like the behind the scenes videos of classic World of Warcraft, meaning vanilla WoW, back when Blizzard was developing it back in like 2003, 2002, and they're talking about that development and what their design philosophy was for the world and questing and leveling up and group content and so on and so forth, it is radically different compared to Cataclysm. It's a completely different mindset with less of the community in mind, with less challenge in mind, with less RPG-ness, adventure, and so on, and just kind of more convenience, more ease, more like it's kind of like one of the things of Cataclysm. It was like Blizzard wanted to make the game more easy to get into and, easy for a new player to just jump in and fall into Azeroth and, get to endgame and start, PvPing and stuff. And yet it had the exact opposite effect to what Blizzard intended. People preferred the old world. They preferred the old way of doing things. They did not like this very linear I could go on and on about this. The point is, I'm just going to end it here because this video is really freaking long. The point is when you play Cataclysm Classic, you will see that it is a huge departure from like what you have played before in Wrath of the Lich King and in TBC. I'm sure there's more that, you know, I could have thought of, but, you know, I'm just sitting here. I just got a couple of notes on a piece of paper. I'm just ranting out of my ass at the moment. Maybe I'm getting some things wrong. I don't know. Leave your thoughts down in the comment section below, guys. But this video is just to try to help some of you guys that are sitting there a little confused as to why, you know, why that BlizzCon room, you know, was so dead silent when they were announcing Cataclysm Classic, because really no one gives a damn about Cataclysm Classic. And maybe there's some people that do, but compared to Wrath, TBC, and especially Vanilla, it ain't nothing. It ain't nothing.